In the summer of 2002, a company worth more than $100 billion simply stopped existing. It had 60,000 employees, 20 million customers, and a chief executive the press had nicknamed the Telecom Cowboy. He was a former milkman and a former basketball coach who wore cowboy boots to meetings on Wall Street. He had built an empire by buying more than 60 companies in a single decade, and he had paid for them mostly with his own soaring stock. Then the stock stopped soaring, and to keep the illusion alive, someone inside WorldCom began moving numbers from one column of a spreadsheet into another. It was one of the simplest accounting tricks imaginable. It hid $11 billion. This is the story of WorldCom, and of the quiet internal auditor who worked nights, in secret, to bring it down. I am Onyx, and this is Fortune and Ruin TV, where we take you inside the true stories of money, power, and collapse. Today, the largest accounting fraud in American history, and the woman who refused to look away. Bernard Ebbers did not look like a titan of telecommunications. Before he ever sold a telephone call, he had worked as a milkman and a bar bouncer, coached high school basketball, and run a chain of motels in Mississippi. In 1983, in Hattiesburg, he and a few partners founded a small company to resell long-distance telephone service. They called it Long Distance Discount Services. 2 years later, Ebbers was running it. In 1996, Congress rewrote the rules of American telecommunications, and a land grab began. What Ebbers understood, earlier than almost anyone, was that the fastest way to grow was not to build. It was to buy. Through the 1990s, the company swallowed competitor after competitor, more than 60 acquisitions in all, and renamed itself WorldCom. Each deal was paid for largely in WorldCom stock. Each deal made the company bigger. And a bigger company meant a higher stock price, which made the next deal easier to buy. It was a machine that ran on momentum. In 1997, Ebbers made his boldest move, a bid of roughly $37 billion for MCI, a long-distance giant several times WorldCom size. T1, the milkman from Mississippi, now controlled one of the largest telecommunications companies on Earth. Wall Street adored him. On paper, his personal stake was worth well over $1 billion. If this is the kind of story you came here for, subscribe. We publish one every week. In 1999, WorldCom announced it would merge with Sprint in a deal worth more than $100 billion. It would have been the largest corporate merger ever attempted. But regulators in Washington and in Europe objected, and in 2000 the deal collapsed. The acquisition machine had finally hit a wall, and it hit that wall at the worst possible moment. The telecom boom was ending. Companies had laid enough fiber optic cable to circle the planet many times over, and there was nowhere near enough traffic to fill it. Prices fell. Revenues fell. And WorldCom's stock, the currency that had bought the entire empire, began to slide. For Bernard Ebbers, that slide was personal. He had borrowed heavily against his own WorldCom shares to fund private ventures, a cattle ranch, a timber company, a yacht building business. As the stock fell, his lenders demanded more collateral, and Ebbers faced being forced to sell. So the board of directors did something extraordinary. It lent him the money. Over roughly 18 months, WorldCom's board authorized loans and guarantees to its own chief executive, totaling more than $400 million. The man at the top of the company was now, quite literally, in debt to it. Which brings us to a phrase that sounds harmless, and is not, line costs. Line costs were the fees WorldCom paid other telephone companies to carry its calls across their networks. They were an ordinary, recurring expense like rent, and they were enormous. Under the rules, an expense like that must be subtracted from revenue in the quarter it is incurred. It lowers your profit immediately. But there is another category on a company's books, capital expenditure. Money spent on a long-lived asset, like a building, written off slowly over many years. Beginning in 2000, prosecutors said, WorldCom's chief financial officer, Scott Sullivan, directed staff to take ordinary line cost expenses and record them as capital expenditure instead. Nothing changed in the real world. Not one cable was laid. Not $1 was saved. But on paper, billions of dollars of costs vanished from the income statement and reappeared as assets. A company that was quietly losing money now looked comfortably profitable. It was, in the end, one of the least sophisticated frauds ever committed at that scale. And that is exactly why it worked. Everyone was watching for something clever. By the time it was finished, WorldCom had overstated its books by roughly $11 billion. Every figure in this film comes from court records, regulatory filings, and contemporary reporting. If that is the kind of work you want more of, subscribe. In the spring of 2002, WorldCom's internal audit team began pulling on a thread. Its leader was a vice president named Cynthia Cooper. Like thousands of her colleagues, she had built her career inside the company, and her savings were tied to its stock. Internal audit was not supposed to be examining the company's accounts. That was the outside auditor's job. And WorldCom's outside auditor was Arthur Andersen, the same firm then disintegrating under the weight of Enron. Cooper's team began working at night, on their own time, copying records before anyone could tell them to stop. When the chief financial officer learned what they were doing, he asked them to delay the investigation until the next quarter. They did not. In June 2002, they confirmed what the entries meant. At least $3.8 billion of ordinary expenses had been booked as capital investment. Cooper took it to the board's audit committee. Within days, Scott Sullivan was fired, the company's controller resigned, and WorldCom told the world. The stock, which had traded above $60 a share, fell to pennies. 17,000 employees lost their jobs. Workers who had loyally held WorldCom shares in their retirement accounts watched a lifetime of saving evaporate in a matter of weeks. In July 2002, WorldCom filed for bankruptcy protection. With more than $100 billion in assets, it was the largest corporate bankruptcy in American history, larger than Enron, which had held that record for barely 7 months. Congress moved with unusual speed. Days later, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act became law, forcing chief executives and chief financial officers to personally certify their financial statements, and making it a crime to knowingly sign a false one. Every public company in America still lives under the rules that WorldCom's collapse wrote. Scott Sullivan pleaded guilty and agreed to testify against the man he had served. Bernard Ebbers went to trial in 2005 and told the jury he had known nothing about the accounting. He was a salesman, he said, not a numbers man. Sullivan testified that Ebbers had told him, again and again, to hit the numbers. On the 15th of March, 2005, a jury convicted Ebbers on 9 counts, including conspiracy and securities fraud. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. He was 63 years old. Sullivan, who cooperated, received 5 years. In December 2019, after serving 13 years, Ebbers was released early on compassionate grounds. He died less than 2 months later. What remained of WorldCom was renamed MCI, and in 2006 it was bought by Verizon. And Cynthia Cooper, the auditor who worked nights, was named one of Time magazine's People of the Year for 2002, alongside 2 other women who had refused to stay quiet. Step back from the courtrooms and the spreadsheets, and the WorldCom story asks something uncomfortable. The fraud was not brilliant. It was a clerk moving a number from one line to another, thousands of times. It survived for years because dozens of people saw a piece of it, and each of them decided it was not their place to ask. It ended because one person decided that it was. Cynthia Cooper was not a prosecutor, or a regulator, or a journalist. She was an employee with a mortgage inside the company, and she asked the question anyway. That is usually how these stories end. Not with a genius detective, but with an ordinary person who will not let it go. Thank you for watching. If this was worth your time, subscribe and watch our films on Enron and Theranos next, because the pattern repeats. I am Onyx. This has been Fortune and Ruin TV.